can do better than that. Good morning. Well, it's nearly afternoon, but that's okay. Buenas tardes. The prelude today is by a Japanese composer, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and it's called Forbidden Colors. It's a very, very reflective and very kind of new agey piece, but it was actually written for music for the film Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which, if you've seen it, will remember that it starred David Bowie, one of the few acting roles that he did. So this is Forbidden Colors.
Good afternoon. My name is Jane Castleman. I'm today's service associate. Reverend Matt will be presenting our message this morning. Welcome into the circle of community. Welcome into this sacred space. Be not tentative, bring your whole self. Bring the joy that makes your heart sing. Bring your sorrow, but your kindness and your compassion. That comes first. Bring also your sorrow and your pain. Bring your brokenness and your disappointments. Spirit of love and mystery, help us to recognize the spark of the divine residing within each of us. May we know the joy of wholeness. May we know the joy of being together. And so I just want to welcome you to our LCUUF Sunday service. May you find here what you are seeking. Our announcements were on a slideshow before the service and were also sent out with our weekly newsletter. If you are new and would like to receive that newsletter and other emails, please talk to a member of the welcome team or write to us at info@lcuuf.org. And now a special welcome to our visitors. If you are visiting with us for the first time or have returned or reconnected with us after a long absence, we invite you to say your name, tell us where you're from. If you are on Zoom, please introduce yourself in the chat box, and it will be read aloud in the fellowship, but we'll start with the people in the room.
Yes. Hello. My name is Lorna Davalos. I am the daughter of Mary Helen Montgomery, and I come every 3 months or so, and I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I get all of the seasons here in Mexico.
Anyone else new who wants to stand up and tell us? Do we have any visitors on Zoom this morning, Kate?
No, it doesn't look like it. No.
Well, maybe they're just hiding. So welcome to all our visitors here and newcomers, both here or on Zoom. Here at LCUUF, we offer a wide variety of services on a variety of topics presented by our members, outside guests, and our minister, Reverend Matt. We hope you will return to sample this variety of thought and belief. And now we will light our chalice. Our chalice lighting words today are by Vanessa Titang. In igniting this chalice, we cast upon it our hopes and intentions for all that is positive in our minds and in our hearts. May this precious light shine on. Thank you. Now, having lit our chalice, let us sing these words together. As the rose tree is composed of the sweetest flowers and the sharpest thorns, as the heavens are sometimes overcast and alternately tempestuous and serene, so are our lives intermingled with hopes and fears, joys and sorrows, pleasure and pain. This is the time in our service where we can share our joys, our sorrows, and our milestones. Just a sentence is enough because we can always talk to each other later and get more. We will start with the folks in the room to give those folks on Zoom a chance to type joys or sorrows into the chat to be read out loud by the Zoom host. So first, let us voice our sorrows. Whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts, are there any sorrows that people here in the room would like to share?
Good morning. My name is Trish, and I would just request we all keep Rabbi Phil Posner in our thoughts and prayers as he will be experiencing a very hard next few months.
Thank you.
My name is Frank Watson, and my thoughts are with Libby Coulterjohn, who has long COVID and it's not getting any better. I pray that somehow she shed it.
Any others? Kate, are there any sorrows shared on Zoom this morning?
No, we have no sorrows on Zoom this morning.
Oh, here's one more. Here we go.
Again, my sorrows to the people in Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan.
Now let us share our joys, whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others. Are there any joys that people would like to share here in the room? No.
Me again, Lorna. Today is my mother's birthday, so that's a joy. And I'm grateful to everyone here, the community that has supported my mom, and I'm so glad that she can come out and get some interaction socially. And we have started doing gratitudes together on the phone every morning, me in Michigan and her here. So I highly recommend it if anyone is feeling down. There are a lot of things to feel down about, but it really helps both of our spirits.
I'm Richard, and I have two related joys. You know, for the last couple of years, I've had a lot of focus on Ramana Maharshi, and now my YouTube channel that I record on every day has 2,600 subscribers, and on Amazon now, the second book is now published of Ramana Maharshi commentaries.
Hi, I just want to thank Dee Dee and Barley for organizing the potluck yesterday. It was a hit. And also, I'm really grateful for the rains.
Good morning. I am David, and I too am grateful for the rain. And I'm especially grateful for having spent a week in San Francisco with my son and his family.
Am I missing something?
Oh, here we go.
Good morning again. I have two joys. Well, one is a joy, and then the other is a joy and a sorrow, and I'll get to that in a second. But my first joy is that today we sold the final 2 tickets to our concert, the orchestra's concert, in 2 weeks' time. We are completely sold out. Again. And I don't know whether many of you know, but Michael Swords at the back there is playing double bass in the orchestra. Thank you, Michael. And my other joy that's tinged with a sorrow is that I'm very pleased that England didn't lose to Denmark on Thursday, but the sorrow is they played abysmally. So we are hoping for better results this coming Thursday.
Mine is a joy and a sorrow. The sorrow first. The fact that the Louisiana governor signed into law the fact that the 10 Commandments, a King James version of those, which are very different from a modern interpretation, are now required to be in every classroom from kindergarten, I guess preschool too, all the way through state-funded colleges. The joy is that without knowing this was going to happen, I had written an article which will be in the July Ojo del Lago about the separation of church and state. And why this is such a joy is that, although I've had other articles in there, this is the first one where I'm taking on more of a Unitarian Universalist, I'm looking at him, way of doing things, because I do not condemn anybody, but I just tell what the Constitution says. And so please look for that. It's a very long article. It's one of the longest they'll ever publish. I'm very pleased that's in July El Ojo del Lago magazine.
Hi, I'm Carol. My joy is that now in Louisiana, they are so afraid of talking about sex, but now they're going to have to talk about adultery to all the kindergartners up to third base.
I think I need to leave it at that, Carol. This is Sharon. I'm Sharon, and my joy is I was watching you, Jane, up there, and I always appreciate your spirit and your presence here. And so then I was thinking, do I want to say anything? And I realized I actually want to also say I just appreciate all the people who are willing to be up at the front. And that said, I'm also very glad, Matt, you're here today.
I would just add to that, if any of you would like to take on that role sometime of doing this, please let me know. It's an ad hoc, last-minute thing, and if you're here and I would like to do it, just let us know. So, lots of joys this morning along with the sorrows. Were there any joys shared on Zoom, Kate?
Yes. This is on. We have several, bear with me because they're kind of spaced out. First one is from Colleen Beery. I'm really enjoying seeing my 5-month-old granddaughter grow and change each day, feeling blessed. One from Terry and Pearl Glenn. Grateful to be here by Zoom from the USA. Another one from Colleen, a joy. Grateful to Paul and Paula for fostering my dear rescue, Leo. He loves them. Let's see.
Mas?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this candle from our care team represents the joys and sorrows that we hold in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. We light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows and joys. Thank you. Let us share a moment of silence to hold in our hearts both the sorrows and the joys that have been shared this morning. There are many ways to be of service to LCUUF. Our time, our treasure, our talents are all necessary components to a healthy fellowship. So now is the time in our service when we ask you to share the gift of treasure through pledging and donations. Instructions for payments to the fellowship are on a slide during the announcements before the service every week. And as we pass the basket, if you're new here today or you're struggling to hold things together, sometimes we all go through that. So let the basket pass you by. Your presence is more than enough of a gift to us. Each week we give half the money collected in the service to an organization providing services to our lakeside community. For the month of June, we're supporting Poco a Poco, which helps people in the San Pedro Itzacan and Mezcala area east of us. This organization supports youth and women in this indigenous area through education, teaching, local organic food growth, providing food and cooked drinking water to renal patients, feeding over 300 children 5 days a week, offering health services, as well as literacy and English as a second language classes. So if you're not attending the fellowship in person, please donate to Share the Basket when you pay your pledge. Donate to Share the Basket separately or indicate what share of your pledge or your donation is for Share the Basket. The offering has now been generously given and gratefully received. Our opening hymn is Love Will Guide Us. Please rise in body or in spirit, body and or in spirit, and join us in singing. Today's reading is from a book called The Evolution of Physics by Albert Einstein and Leopold Infeld, written in 1938, a long time ago. We could say, this is a quote, we could say creating a new theory is not like destroying an old barn and erecting a skyscraper in its place. It's rather like climbing a mountain, gaining new and wider views, discovering unexpected connections between our starting point and its rich environment. But the point from which we started out still exists and can be seen, although it appears smaller and forms a tiny part of our broad view gained by the mastery of the obstacles on our adventurous way up. This morning and next week, no, this is yours, Matt. Yeah, sorry.
We probably have an introductory slide or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, usual.
Do you want this?
Yeah, I'll leave it up. So, okay, am I on? No. Oh, let me check. That has to be on. For it all to work. Wow. So this morning and next week, we'll be exploring quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, or QM, is the fundamental theory of physics that explains the behavior of the world at small scales. QM gets at foundational questions like, what are we? What are we made of? And how did what is around us come to be? So from a philosophical, maybe even a spiritual viewpoint, QM is quite illuminating. But quantum mechanics is quite esoteric and hard to grasp.
a heavy dose of math is really required to begin to make sense of it. And it also doesn't align with common sense. As we'll see, it is just weird. Now, admittedly, I'm stepping a little bit to the edges of my role as a minister. And while this subject is of great interest to me, it's also a bit outside my area of expertise. I will note, however, that in my training for my first career as an electrical engineer, I did take a graduate class in quantum mechanics. Now, that class very much focused on the practical applications of QM, and certainly quantum mechanics is around us every day. Most of us carry objects in our pockets which are dependent on QM. And even things as ordinary as these LED light bulbs in this room are based on ideas of quantum mechanics. But to begin to delve into this quantum world, let's start by looking at light, for example. What is the nature of light? Isaac Newton, the great physicist, claimed that light consisted of tiny particles. Christian Huygens countered that light was made of waves, much analogous to waves on the surface of water. And finally, in 1801, the British polymath Thomas Young demonstrated that light was, in fact, wave-like. He did this through an experiment which I'm going to reproduce this morning. And so up here, I have set up, and you might want to give an overall shot if you can, Jesus, a little experimental setup. I have a cat toy here, one of those laser cat toys, and it's shining a laser beam through a little two-slit slide. I made one of these at home, but it didn't work well, so I bought one. So all this stuff is about $15 worth of stuff. And so the light goes through this slide and then ends up on this screen back here. And you can see now, I have my phone set up to kind of project the image of the screen onto our big screens and out for the folks on Zoom to see. And you can see, and if somebody from the audience wants to step up and verify that what we were seeing up there is a bunch of little dots. You see that there's a lot of little tiny dots in a row. Now, what you would expect if you thought that, well, light was just kind of like particles or something, you'd probably expect 2 dots, one for each slit. But something else happens. How do we explain this? How do we explain this pattern of dots when both slits are open? Oh, the thing I forgot to demo is that if we close one of these, and so we'll put the slide back up with showing if we close one of these, and it's a little difficult for me to do this because the slots are so close together, but if we close one of these, the dots just sort of smear out and go away. We end up with if only one slit is open, we end up with kind of just a blur, okay? So there's something about the 2 slits that's really important. Well, we can use water waves as an analogy to try to understand what's going on here. And it does turn out that the mathematics backs this up. So I have here a short video showing what's going on. This is from Vertasium, the YouTube channel by Derek Muller, one of my favorite sources for science communication. So we'll pop this up here.
If light were behaving as particles, you would expect them to go through each slit and just produce a bright spot underneath. So we would see 2 bright spots on the bottom of the box. But if light's behaving as waves, then the wave from one slit can interact with the waves from the other slit. I've got a demonstration here on a little pond where we can see this with water waves. I have two sources of ripples, which are basically like the two slits. When I create ripples with a single source, they travel out with circular wavefronts. Nothing particularly surprising there. But if I add a second source of ripples, then we start getting an interesting pattern. This pattern is created by the ripples from the two sources interacting with each other. Where they meet up peaks with peaks and troughs with troughs, the amplitude of the wave is increased. That's what we call constructive interference. But if the peak from one wave meets up with the trough from the other, then we get destructive interference and there's basically no wave there. And this is exactly what was happening with the light. When the light from one slit met up peaks with peaks and troughs with troughs, they constructively interfered and produced a bright spot. But if the trough from the wave from one slit met up with the peak of the wave from the other slit, they would destructively interfere and you wouldn't see any light there. It's light canceling itself out.
And that's what we saw here in this room. The experiment demonstrates that light is made of waves. The waves flow through those two slits and they interfere with each other, just like the water in the pond. And the interference manifests itself as patterns of dots, light and dark, on the card. So this shows that light is wave-like in nature. And if one of the slits is closed, the light doesn't interfere with itself, and we do not get dots. We get a smooth pattern, which is more proof. So this is just one example of where science was in the 19th century. That was a time when we thought, well, we thought, can I use we? It was that we almost completely understood the world, or at least we thought that complete understanding was within reach. So, for example, in 1899, in a lecture on light waves, the famous physicist Albert Michelson said, the more important fundamental laws and facts of physical science have now been discovered. And these are now so firmly established that the possibility of their ever being supplanted in consequence of new discoveries is exceedingly remote. End quote. So physics, which we now call classical or Newtonian physics, seemed nearly complete. They believed that given precise enough equipment, we could make sense of anything in the world. The universe was deterministic and knowable. But problems began to creep up. One problem was, surprise, the nature of light. Toward the end of that 19th century, physicists began to realize that light was also particle-like in nature. Albert Einstein won his Nobel Prize, he's receiving it here, for showing that light could be particle-like and wave-like. In essence, Einstein had discovered the photon, the particle of light. So, back to our double slit experiment. It obviously showed that light was wave-like. Isn't there a contradiction here? Well, it seems that as long as you have lots of light going through those two slits, these photons going through, maybe they kind of act like, create a sort of a wave-like pattern. And this is just kind of analogous with water. I mean, we know that water is made up of little particles we call molecules. So this sounds like a reasonable explanation, except what if you did this same experiment with only one photon, one particle at a time? Let's see what happens.
Here I have a more contained double slit experiment where there is a laser which fires a beam through a single slit, then through a double slit, and onto a screen where you can see a well-defined interference pattern. There's a series of bright and dark bands which are much easier to observe than when I use sunlight, because with only one wavelength there are no other colors involved. This is what a graph of intensity versus position would look like for the interference pattern.
So Muller's setup is much like mine. Now, he did add a single slit to get the patterns to be vertical lines, which would be easier for him to work with, not dots. But otherwise, it's the same. Now let's see what happens if we do that experiment with only one photon at a time. Again, the video.
But what if I decrease the intensity so much that there wasn't a whole wave of light going through there? There were only single photons. Then how could they interfere with each other because there's only one in the device at any one time? So would we still see an interference pattern? That is what we're going to find out. In order to make this work, I had to line up a very faint source, and to see where the light was going, I had to shroud my head in that black cloth. But I finally have the apparatus ready. You can see up here I have a frequency counter which actually counts the number of photons received per second at the detector. The detector is a photomultiplier tube which is capable of detecting single photons. It's like a very sensitive eye, like the frog's eye. Now right now there's no light passing through to the detector, but there is still a bit of a background reading, and that's because I can't block all the light out of there. Plus there are cosmic rays passing through this room which will also set off the detector. I'm plotting a graph of the number of photons counted as a function of position across the detector. If you have a look after 1 second, the distribution seems random. There doesn't seem to be any pattern in the arrangement of those photons as they hit the detector. So maybe it's true, a single photon can't interfere with itself because it's just a localized point. It has to go through one slit or the other. But just to be sure, let's add up the results over a period of time and see if any pattern emerges. Look at that. You can clearly see the same interference pattern that we got when we were sending tons of photons through, but we're getting it out of single photons. We're counting up individual photons. And that pattern is emerging as we aggregate the results over time. But how could this be happening? How could a single photon pass through both slits? Well, if we try to interpret these results in terms of the objects we experience every day, they don't make any sense. A photon is something different to a macroscopic object. It's not a wave and it's not a particle, it's a quantum mechanical object. And sometimes it seems like it has properties of a wave, and sometimes it seems like it has properties of a particle, but ultimately it is something totally different to anything we've experienced before. And that's what makes this seem so counterintuitive. So what is light, wave or particle? The true answer, I think, is neither. Though if you want, you could call it a wavicle.
A wavicle. Now, I didn't have the budget to put together that setup that Mueller showed in the video, but I hope you trust his results. So here's the thing. If you try to apply common sense, this result seems really confusing, really counterintuitive. The experimental setup assures that there would be at most one light particle, one photon on the path at any time. But if there was only one particle in the experiment, which slit does it go through? What's it going to interfere with? We would not expect to see that interference pattern, and yet we do. And over time, particle by particle, the interference pattern appears. As long as we thought of light as waves, the interference patterns that we saw made sense. On the other hand, if light were single particles, we'd expect them to go through one of the two slits or the other, and we'd end up with two bright spots, just two. But no, we get the interference pattern, a weird, counterintuitive result. So it does seem like we are knocking down the old barn, to use Einstein's language, rather than climbing the mountain. it does seem like this new world is so strangely different from the old one where we started. So back to the two-slit experiment. It's described in great detail in a book by science writer Anil Ananaswamy. The book called Through Two Doors at Once, the elegant experiment that captures the enigma of our dual reality. He shows that the two-slit experiment is the gift that keeps on giving. Variations on this experiment continue to be done even today, and we continue to learn from it. And we continue to find, well, more quantum weirdness from these experiments. First off, this kind of behavior is not limited to just light. Remember that we've come to understand that light seems to be both a particle and a wave, or maybe a wavicle. Well, every other particle is also. This experiment has been done with other particles. Electrons have been tested, and protons and neutrons, and they all show similar interference patterns, indicating that they can be waves as well. Further, even larger items can behave as waves. Even molecules can be waves. Molecules consisting of some 2,000 atoms have been tested in this way in an experiment done in 2019. Now let's pause for a moment and take in this reality, what the world is telling us. Everything has a dual nature. Particles are waves, and waves can have particle nature. Even larger objects can have a wave-like nature according to the theory. Atoms, molecules, even you and me have a wave-like nature. It's just that we cannot measure those waves for large objects like ourselves. At a deeper level, this two-slit experiment is telling us something else. We do not live in a deterministic universe. We cannot know. We cannot predict in advance exactly where that photon is going to hit the screen. And yet, we are able to precisely calculate the probabilities that the photon will hit any given area on the screen. I mean, it's as if we were gamblers, and we know the odds very well. But when we place our bets, it's all up to chance. Now, it's not merely that we cannot measure accurately enough. No matter how hard we try, we simply cannot know. Does anybody need a knife sharpened? Just checking. This probabilistic aspect of quantum mechanics was a most disturbing limitation to many of the scientists who had grown up with classical mechanics, where you could, in principle, know everything about the universe. It's a paradox, in a way, that quantum mechanics can explain so much about the universe. Quantum mechanics is fundamental to our understanding of chemistry, for example. It's fundamental to what we've discovered about the nature of atoms and their constituent parts, protons, neutrons, quarks, and gluons. And in a practical sense, QM is fundamental to our everyday life, to those phones we carry in our pockets and all the computers and the related technology that interconnects those devices. And yet, quantum mechanics only gives us probabilities, not certainties. That's pretty strange, even disturbing. But things get even weirder. Let's go back to that single particle experiment that we saw in the video. Suppose we assume that those protons do go through one slit or the other. So, we get sneaky. We set up a tiny little detector on one slit to try to observe any photons that go through. What happens? the interference pattern just goes away. In essence, you ask the photons to behave like particles, and so they did. So the very act of observing, of measuring, can affect the experiment in significant ways. Another thing that was completely disturbing to classical physicists. Or another situation. We can arrange our experiment so that two particles, electrons, let's say, share some property which we have not yet measured. Physicists would say these particles are entangled. We now separate them, maybe even light years apart, and we make a measurement on one of them, and the other one, far away, instantaneously, immediately responds to that measurement. This is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. And it bothered him very much. It bothered others as well. And no one has developed a good explanation for this phenomenon. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, this could be a possible way to do faster than light communication. Unfortunately, nature doesn't give us that option. While the connection is instantaneous, we cannot use it for instantaneous communication. So what do we make of all these peculiarities? The physicists working on quantum phenomena in the early 20th century had no clue how to explain what was really going on. They couldn't make sense of what their experiments and their mathematics were telling them. And yet, that mathematics, in particular the Schrödinger equation, which describes those probabilities of the quantum wave function, as well as other mathematics, has been remarkably successful in describing exactly how things work in our physical world. So while the math essentially describes probabilities, we get very precise answers about these probabilities. We get answers that are very accurate to very high precision. But we don't have a clue what's going on under the hood. We can do the math, we can get the correct answers, but we really don't understand why. That's very discomforting for many of us. Let me quote from an article in Quanta magazine. Yes, there is a magazine by that name, and I recommend it. The theoretical physicist John Wheeler, and I'm quoting, the theoretical physicist John Wheeler once used the phrase great smoky dragon to describe a particle of light going from a source to a photon counter. The mouth of the dragon is sharp where it bites the counter. The tail of the dragon is sharp where the photon starts, Wheeler wrote. The photon, in other words, has a definite reality at the beginning and end, but its state in the middle, the dragon's body, is nebulous. What the dragon does or looks like in between, we have no right to speak, he said. End quote. So the essential idea is that we know the beginning, the laser, and we know the end, the screen, but we really don't know what's going on in between. With a double-slit experiment, for example, we know exactly what's happening with the photons coming out of the laser, and we know exactly where they end up hitting the screen, but we're pretty clueless about what's going on in between. It's nebulous, it's smoky. But, contra John Wheeler, at least my point of view, do we really have no right to speak, to speculate about what's going on in between, in the smoke? It seems like for a long time, we've not even cared. That is, physicists have not even cared to look into the metaphorical smoke. As writer Rob Reed put it, and I quote, "To me, it's almost like, imagine, We are so good at predicting the weather. We know it a full year in advance, down to the number of drops in every storm. And we have these immaculate predictions that the entire travel industry, agricultural industry, even the wedding industry sits atop. But if you go to a Nobel Prize winning weatherman, and they'd probably have Nobels for weathermen if it was that well understood, if you ask them what's happening with the weather, they'd say, I don't know. I think it might be a thunder god. And another weatherman would say, well, some people think it's a result of conscious minds interacting with the clouds. And another person would say, sunspots. You could ask 100 top weathermen, which one of these things is it? And most of them would be like, I just don't really care. That just blows my mind. End quote. So which is it? Thunder gods? Our minds interacting with the clouds? Sunspots? Or maybe we should not care. I, for one, do want to care. I want to understand to the best of my ability what underlies these weird things that we see in the quantum mechanical universe, this universe that we live in. So let's consider some of the multiple competing interpretations that attempt to explain what's behind all the weirdness. Let's consider what might really be going on in the universe around us. This is what we'll look into next week. And our closing hymn is Joy, Thou Goddess. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing. We live in a quantum universe whose mysteries and secrets are normally hid from us. So when we... Uh-oh, somebody's going to get electrocuted. So when we do see these mysteries in glances, like we did today, we often find those mysteries strange, weird, unbelievable. It is tempting to set them aside and retreat back into the everyday. And yet, when we allow ourselves to be open to these rare and unusual things, we may be able to climb the mountain and see new vistas and gain a higher and clearer understanding of the landscape that surrounds us, this wondrous universe of which we ourselves are a part.
Hear, hear.
let us extinguish our chalice with these words, which we read together. Extinguish this flame. Is over. Our service begins. Go in peace with a purpose and gratitude for this experience we've shared together, this space, this togetherness.